You know, every single day, artificial intelligence is making these invisible judgments about you, about your health, your job prospects, even your freedom. And this isn't some far off sci fi concept. Nope, this is happening right now on a massive scale. Okay, let's get into it.
So let's start with a number that is, well, it's just staggering 34.7%. That's how much higher the error rate is for major commercial facial recognition systems when identifying darker skinned women compared to lighter skinned men. We're not talking about a tiny little glitch here. This is a massive, fundamental failure in a technology that's being used everywhere.
Now, let's take this inside our courtrooms. An algorithm, one that's supposed to predict future criminals, was almost twice as likely to falsely flag black defendants as being high risk compared to white defendants. Look at that, 45% versus 23%. That's practically a coin flip chance of being misjudged by a piece of software.
And it even gets into matters of life and death. A widely used healthcare AI was found to systematically recommend less medical care for black patients than for white patients who were at the very same level of sickness. The real-world impact of that is just huge, potentially leading to way worse health outcomes for millions of people.
So you have to be asking, where is all this coming from? And this is the most important thing to understand. AI isn't born biased. It doesn't invent this stuff on its own. It's a mirror. It learns from the data we give it. And that data, well, it's packed with decades of our own human societal biases.
The official term for this whole mess is algorithmic bias. Basically, it's when an AI system starts making these unfair, discriminatory decisions simply because it was trained on our own flawed, prejudiced history. It doesn't just copy our biases, it automates them, and often it makes them even worse. So here's how it happens, broken down into 3 simple steps. First, you feed the AI a ton of biased data, say 10 years of hiring records from an industry that mostly hired men. Second, the AI looks at all that data and learns what it thinks is a pattern. It concludes, hey, men must be better candidates. And third, it takes that flawed logic and applies it at a speed and scale that's just impossible for humans, systematically screening out qualified women. Okay, so this isn't just theory. Let's dig into a few deeply researched, real-world cases where this kind of bias code caused actual, tangible harm to real people.
This quote from MIT's Joy Buolamwini really just hits the nail on the head. Her research, which she called gender shades, was what really blew the lid off these systems that we were all being told were perfectly objective and fair. And her findings, wow. Just look at these numbers from some of the biggest tech companies out there. For IBM's system, the error rate for lighter-skinned men was a tiny 0.3%, but for darker-skinned women, it jumped to almost 35%. These systems weren't just a little off. They were functionally broken for an entire group of people.
So what's the real consequence here? I mean, this is so much more than just your phone failing to unlock. When police departments use this technology, these insane error rates directly translate into a higher risk of misidentification, of false arrests, and that risk falls overwhelmingly on women of color.
All right, our next case is from the world of healthcare. And this quote from researcher Ziad Obermeyer, it perfectly explains the cracked logic at the heart of the problem. The algorithm wasn't told to discriminate. It just used a shortcut. It assumed that past healthcare spending was a good way to predict future health needs.
And here's what happened when it followed that logic. Because of historical inequities, black patients had, on average, lower healthcare costs in the past. So the algorithm made a huge mistake. It concluded they were healthier. So for patients who were actually equally sick, look at this, only about 18% of black patients were assigned to get extra care compared to almost 47% of white patients.
The result? It was nothing short of a public health crisis hiding in plain sight. Millions of the sickest black patients in the country were being flagged by the system as healthier than they really were, making them way less likely to get the critical care they actually needed. And finally, let's go back to the criminal justice system. A huge investigation by ProPublica dug into the CompAS algorithm, a tool used all the time in sentencing decisions, and what they found was that its predictions were directly messing with people's freedom.
And here's what's so wild about this failure. It was biased in 2 different directions. The algorithm was not only more likely to falsely label black defendants as high risk when they weren't, but it was also more likely to incorrectly label white defendants who did go on to commit another crime as low risk.
And you can imagine that devastating result. Based on these totally flawed predictions, black defendants were more likely to get longer, tougher sentences and get denied parole,
all based on a discriminatory piece of code that was presented as objective.
So, we've seen these big case studies, but let's bring this home, let's make it personal. How could this invisible judgment be affecting your life right now, maybe without you even having a clue?
Could an algorithm cost you a job? Oh, absolutely. Amazon famously had to scrap a recruiting AI they built because it taught itself that male candidates were just better. It was literally penalizing resumes that had the word women's in them, like Women's Chess Club, and downgrading people who went to all women's colleges.
Could AI be affecting your medical care? Well, we just saw pretty clear proof that it can. That exact algorithm we talked about, the one that led to undertreating Black patients, was being used in hospitals all across the United States, shaping the care of millions of people.
And how about getting a loan or a mortgage? A Federal Reserve study found that AI systems deny qualified Black and Hispanic applicants at rates way higher than white applicants who have very similar financial histories, basically baking old patterns of discrimination into our new financial systems.
So, when you start to put all these pieces together, you really begin to see the true shape of this problem. This isn't just about a few buggy algorithms. It's an invisible and, frankly, a rapidly growing crisis. The key things to remember are these. First, AI bias operates at an incredible scale. Second, it's almost always invisible. You never get a notification saying you were rejected by an algorithm. Third, it doesn't just copy our old biases, it often amplifies them, turning small prejudices into massive systemic problems. And most importantly, all of this causes real, tangible harm to people's jobs, their health, and their basic freedom.
Which really leaves us with a final and pretty crucial question. We've talked about how AI is like a mirror, right? It reflects the mountains of historical data that we feed it. So if that reflection comes back to us looking biased, looking distorted and unfair, where do we focus our energy? Do we spend all our time trying to fix the mirror, or do we finally turn around and try to fix ourselves?